The Thumb Mark of St. Peter. And now, Aunt Jane, it is up to you. Yes, we're expecting something really spicy. You're laughing at me. You think because I live in this out-of-the-way spot, I am not likely to have had any interesting experiences. Oh, God forbid I should ever regard village life as peaceful and uneventful, said Raymond. Not after the horrible revelations we've heard from you. The cosmopolitan world seems a mild and peaceful place compared with St. Mary Mead. Well, my dear, human nature is much the same everywhere, and of course one has opportunities of observing it at closer quarters in a village. You really are unique, Aunt Jane, said Joyce Lempriere. I hope you don't mind me calling you Aunt Jane. I don't know why I do it. Don't you, my dear? She looked up for a moment or two with something quizzical in her glance, which made the blood flame to the girl's cheeks. Raymond West fidgeted and cleared his throat in a somewhat embarrassed manner. Miss Marple looked at them both and smiled again, then bent her attention once more to her knitting. It is true, of course, that I have lived what is called a very uneventful life, but I have had a lot of experience in solving different little problems that have arisen. Some of them have been quite ingenious, but it would be no good telling them to you, because they are about such unimportant things you would not be interested. Things like who cut the meshes of Mrs. Jones's string bag, and why Mrs. Sims only wore her new fur coat once. Very interesting, really, to a student of human nature. No, the only experience I can remember that would be of interest to you at all is the one about my poor niece Mabel's husband. It's about 10 or 15 years ago now. Happily it is all over and done with, and everyone has forgotten about it. People's memories are very short. A lucky thing, I always think. Oh, I must just count this row. The decreasing is a little awkward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 3 pearl. That is right. What was I saying? Oh, yes, poor Mabel. She was my niece, a nice girl, really a very nice girl, but a trifle what one might call silly, rather fond of being melodramatic and of saying a great deal more than she meant whenever she was upset. She married a Mr. Denman when she was 22. I'm afraid it was not a very happy marriage. I had hoped very much the attachment would not come to anything, for Mr. Denman was a man of very violent temper, not the kind of man who would be patient with Mabel's foibles. And I also learned that there was insanity in his family. However, girls were just as obstinate then as they are now, and always shall be. Mabel married him. I didn't see very much of her after the marriage. She came to stay with me once or twice, and, well, they asked me there several times, but as a matter of fact I'm not very fond of staying in other people's houses. I always managed to make some excuse. They'd been married 10 years when Mr. Denman died suddenly. No children. He left all his money to Mabel. I wrote, of course. I offered to come to Mabel if she wanted me, but she wrote back a very sensible letter, and I gathered that she was not altogether overwhelmed by grief. I thought that only natural, because I knew they'd not been getting on together for some time. It was not until about 3 months afterwards that I got a most hysterical letter from Mabel, begging me to come to her, and saying that things were going from bad to worse, and she could not stand it much longer. So, of course, I put Clara on board wages, and sent the plate and the King Charles tankard to the bank, and I went off at once. I found Mabel in a very nervous state. The house, Myrtle Dean, was a fairly large one, very comfortably furnished. There was a cook and a house parlour-maid, as well as a nurse-attendant to look after old Mr. Denman, Mabel's husband's father, who was what is called not quite right in the head. Quite peaceful and well-behaved, but distinctly odd at times. As I say, there was insanity in the family. I was really shocked to see the change in Mabel. She was a mass of nerves, twitching all over, yet I had the greatest difficulty in making her tell me what the trouble was. I got at it, as one always does get at these things, indirectly. I asked her about some friends of hers she was always mentioning in her letters, the Gallaghers. She said, to my surprise, that she hardly ever saw them nowadays. Other friends whom I mentioned elicited the same remark. I spoke to her then of the folly of shutting herself up and brooding, and especially of the silliness of cutting herself adrift from friends. Then she came bursting out with the truth. "It's not my doing, it's theirs. There's not a soul in the place who'll speak to me now. When I go down the High Street they all get out of the way so they shan't have to meet me or speak to me. I'm like a kind of leper. It's awful. I can't bear it any longer. I shall have to sell this house and go abroad." Well, I was more disturbed than I can tell you. I was knitting a comforter for old Mrs. Hay at the time, and in my perturbation I dropped 2 stitches, and I never discovered it until long after. My dear Mabel, you amaze me. What is the cause of all of this? Even as a child, Mabel was difficult. I had the greatest difficulty in getting her to give me a straightforward answer to my question. She would only say vague things about wicked talk and idle people who had nothing better to do than gossip, and people who put ideas into other people's heads. Then it's all quite clear to me. There is evidently some story being circulated about you, and what that story is you must know as well as anyone. Are you going to tell me? It's so wicked! Well, of course it is wicked. There is nothing that you can tell me about people's minds that would astonish or surprise me. Now, Mabel, will you tell me, please, in plain English, what people are saying about you? Then it all came out. It seemed that Geoffrey Denman's death, being quite sudden and unexpected, gave rise to various rumours. In plain English, as I put it to her, people were saying that she had poisoned him. Now, as I suspect you know, there is nothing more cruel than talk, and there is nothing more difficult to combat. When people say things behind your back, there is nothing you can refute or deny, and rumours go on growing and growing, and no one can stop them. I was quite certain of one thing. Mabel was quite incapable of poisoning anyone, and I didn't see why life should be ruined for her and her home made unbearable, just because, in all probability, she'd been doing something silly and foolish. There is no smoke without fire, Mabel. You have got to tell me what started people off on this tack. There must have been something, dear. There's nothing at all, except Geoffrey did die very suddenly. He was quite well at supper that evening, and then he was violently ill in the night. The doctor was sent for, of course, but the poor dear man died a few minutes after his arrival. He thought death was the result of eating poisoned mushrooms. Well, I suppose a sudden death of that kind might start tongues wagging, but surely not without some additional facts. Did you have a quarrel with Geoffrey, or anything of that sort? Breakfast. And the servants heard it, I suppose? They weren't in the room? No, my dear, but they probably were fairly near the door. I knew the carrying power of Mabel's high-pitched hysterical voice only too well. Geoffrey Denman, too, was a man given to raising his voice loudly when angry. What did you quarrel about? It was always the same things over and over again. Some little thing would start us off, and Geoffrey became impossible and said abominable things. I told him what I thought of him. There has been a lot of quarrelling, then? It wasn't my fault. My dear child, it does not matter whose fault it was. That is not what we are discussing. In a place like this, everybody's private affairs are more or less public property. You and your husband were always quarrelling. You had a particularly bad quarrel one morning, and that night your husband died suddenly and mysteriously. Now, is that all? Or is there anything else? I don't know what you mean by anything else. Just what I say, my dear. If you have done anything silly, don't for heaven's sake keep it back now. I only want to do what I can to help you. Nothing, and nobody can help me, except death. Well, have a little more faith in Providence, dear. Now I know perfectly well there is something else you are keeping back. It took me a long time, but I got it at last. She had gone down to the chemist's that morning and bought some arsenic. She had, of course, to sign the book for it, and naturally the chemist had talked. Who is your doctor? Dr. Rawlinson. Well, to put it in perfectly plain language, I would describe him as an old dodderer. I've had too much experience of life to believe in the infallibility of doctors. Some of them are clever men, and some of them are not, and half the time the best of them don't know what is the matter with you. I have no truck with doctors and their medicines myself. Well, I thought the things over, and then I put on my bonnet, and I went to call on Dr. Rawlinson. He was just as I remembered him, a nice old man, kindly, vague, and so short-sighted as to be pitiful, slightly deaf, and, withal, touchy and sensitive to the last degree. He was on his high horse at once when I mentioned Geoffrey Denman's death, talked for a long time about various kinds of fungi, edible and otherwise. He'd questioned the cook, and she had admitted that one or two of the mushrooms cooked had been a little queer, but as the shop had sent them, she thought they must be all right. The more she thought about it since, the more she was convinced their appearance was unusual. Well, she would be, I thought. They would start by being quite like mushrooms in appearance. Then they would end by being orange with purple spots. There is nothing that class cannot remember if it tries. Did Mr. Denman manage to say anything to you, Doctor?
The time I arrived, Mr. Denman was quite unconscious, was incapable of swallowing even. He died within a few minutes. Anything else you want to know, madam, you can glean from reading the certificate I gave. I assure you it is entirely accurate.
How much of that was obstinacy, and how much of it was genuine belief, I cannot be sure. I went straight home and asked Mabel, quite frankly, why she had bought arsenic. You must have had a reason, dear.
Oh, I wanted to make away with myself. I was too unhappy. I thought I'd end it all.
Did you now? Have you the arsenic still?
No, I threw it away.
Did you now? What happened when he was taken ill? Did he call you?
No, he rang the bell violently. He must have rung it several times. At last Dorothy, the house parlour-maid, heard it, and she waked the cook up, and they came down. And when Dorothy saw him, she was frightened, and he was rambling and delirious. So she left cook with him and then came rushing to me. So I got up and I went to him, and of course I saw at once he was dreadfully ill. Unfortunately, Brewster, who looks after old Mr. Denman, he was away for the night, so there was no one who knew what to do. I sent Dorothy off for the doctor, and cook and I stayed with him. But you know, after a few minutes I could not bear it any longer. It was too dreadful. I went back to my room, and I locked that door.
Well, how very selfish and unkind of you. No doubt that conduct of yours has done nothing to help you since, you may be sure of that. Cook will have repeated it everywhere. Oh, this is a bad business. Next I spoke to the servants. The cook wanted to tell me about the mushrooms, but I stopped her. I was tired of those mushrooms. Instead, I questioned both of them very closely about their master's condition on that night. They both agreed that he seemed to be in great agony, that he was unable to swallow and could only speak in a strangled voice. And when he did speak, it was only rambling, nothing sensible. Well, what did he say when he was rambling? Something about fish, wasn't it? That's right. A heap of fish, that's what he said. Nonsense. He wasn't in his right mind, poor gentleman. Well, there did not seem to be any sense to be made of that, and so as a last resource I went up to see Brewster, who was a gaunt, middle-aged woman of about 50. It's a pity I wasn't here that night. Nobody seems to have tried to do anything for him until the doctor came. I suppose he was delirious, though that's not a symptom of ptomaine poisoning, is it? It depends. How is your patient getting on? Oh, no change there, don't expect it. He's pretty bad. Weak? Oh, no, strong enough physically. It's his eyesight. That's failing badly. But his mind's failing very fast now. I told both Mr. and Mrs. Denman he ought to be in an institution, but Mrs. Denman wouldn't hear of it at any price. I will say for Mabel that she always has a kindly heart. Well, there the thing was. I thought it over in every aspect, and at last I decided that there was only one thing to be done. In view of the rumours that were going about, permission must be applied to exhume the body, and a proper post-mortem must be made. Lying tongues must be quietened once and for all. Mabel, of course, made a fuss, but mostly on sentimental grounds, disturbing the dead in the peaceful grave, etc., etc. But I was firm. I won't make a long story of this part of it. We got the order, and they did the autopsy, or whatever they call it. But the result was not so satisfactory as it might have been. There was no trace of arsenic, that was all to the good, but the actual words of the report were, there was nothing to show by what means the deceased had come to his death. So you see that did not lead us out of trouble altogether. People went on talking about rare poisons impossible to detect and rubbish of that sort. I'd seen the pathologist who'd done the post-mortem. I asked him several questions, though he tried his best to get out of answering most of them. But I got out of him that he considered it highly unlikely that poisoned mushrooms were the cause of death. An idea was simmering in my mind, and I asked him what poison, if any, could have been employed to obtain that result. He made a long explanation to me, most of which I must admit I did not follow, but it amounted to this, that death might have been due to some strong vegetable alkaloid. The idea I had was this. Supposing the taint of insanity was in Geoffrey Denham's blood too, might he not have made away with himself? He had, at one period of his life, studied medicine, and he would have a good knowledge of poisons and their effects. I didn't think it sounded likely, but it was the only thing I could think of. I was nearly at my wits' end, I can tell you. Now, I dare say you modern young people will laugh, but when I am really in bad trouble, I always say a little prayer to myself. Anywhere, when I am walking along the street or at a bazaar, I always get an answer. It may be some trifling thing, apparently quite unconnected with the subject, but there it is. I had that text pinned over my bed when I was a little girl. Ask, and you shall receive. On the morning that I am telling you about, I was walking along the high street, and I was praying hard. I shut my eyes, and when I opened them, what do you think was the first thing I saw?
5 faces, with varying degrees of interest, turned to Miss Marple. It may be safely assumed, however, that no one would have guessed the answer to the question right.
I saw the window of the fishmonger's shop. It said fresh haddock.
Oh, my God, Aunt Jane, what an answer to a prayer! A fresh haddock!
Yes, Raymond, and there is no need to be profane about it. The hand of God is everywhere. The first thing I saw were the black spots, the marks of St. Peter's thumb. That is the legend, you know, St. Peter's thumb. And that brought things home to me. I needed faith, the ever-true faith of St. Peter. I connected the two things together, faith and fish.
Sir Henry blew his nose rather hurriedly. Joyce bit her lip.
Do you not remember his dying words about fish? I was absolutely convinced that there was some solution of the mystery to be found in those words, and I went home determined to get to the bottom of them. Has it ever occurred to you how much we go by what is called context? There is a place on Dartmoor called Grey Weather. Now, if you talked to a local, they'd think you were referring to the stone circle, which it is named after. But you might have been speaking of the atmosphere. And if you were overheard a fragment of your conversation by someone who was not local, they might assume you are talking of the weather when in fact you are referring to the stones. Context, you see. So when we repeat a conversation, we don't as a rule repeat the actual words. We put in some other words that seem to us to mean the same thing. I saw both the cook and Dorothy separately. I asked the cook if she was quite clear that her master had really mentioned a heap of fish. She said she was quite sure. Were those his exact words, I asked, or did he mention some particular kind of fish?
Well, that's it. It was some particular fish.
What was it now? It's a heap of... now, let me see. It wasn't any of the fish you sent to table. Would it be a perch now, or pike? It didn't begin with a P. Dorothy also recalled that her master had mentioned some special kind of fish. Some outlandish kind of fish it was. What was it? Did he say heap or pile? Pile, I think. I really can't be sure now. It's hard to remember the actual words, isn't it, miss? Especially when they don't make sense. Now I come to think of it, I'm pretty sure it was a pile, and the fish began with C. It wasn't cod, though. or crayfish. The next part is where I am really proud of myself, because of course I do not know anything about drugs. Nasty, dangerous things I call them. I've got an old recipe of my grandmother's for tansy tea, and that is worth any amount of your drugs. But I knew that there were several medical volumes in the house, and in one of them was an index of drugs. You see, my idea was that Geoffrey had taken some particular poison, and was trying to say the name of it. Well, I looked down the list of H's, beginning H-E. Nothing, well, not anything that sounded likely. So then I began on the P's, and almost at once I came to, well, what do you think? Pilocarpine. Can't you understand? A man who could hardly speak, trying to drag that word out. What would it sound like to a cook who'd never heard the word? Wouldn't it convey the impression, pile of carp?
By Jove, I suppose it might. I would never have hit upon that. Most interesting, yes, most interesting.
I quickly turned to the page indicated in the index. I read about pilocarpine and its effect on the eyes and other things, which did not seem to have a bearing on the case, but at last I came to a most significant phrase. Has been tried with success as an antidote for atropine poisoning. I can't tell you the light that dawned upon me then. I never had thought it likely Geoffrey Denman would commit suicide. No, this new solution was not only possible, but I was absolutely sure it was the correct one, because all the pieces fitted in logically.
I'm not going to try and guess, Aunt Jane. Go on. Tell us, what was so startlingly clear to you?
I don't know anything about medicine, of course, but I do happen to know this, that when my eyesight was failing, the doctor ordered me drops with atropine sulphate in them. I went straight upstairs to old Mr. Denman's room, and I did not beat about the bush. Mr. Denman, I know everything. Why did you poison your son? He looked at me for a minute or two. Rather a handsome old man he was in his way. And then he burst out laughing. One of the most vicious laughs I've ever heard. I can assure you it made my flesh creep. I had only heard anything like it once before, when poor Mrs. Jones went off her head. Yes, he said, I got even with Geoffrey. I was too clever for him.
He was going to put me away, wasn't he? Have me shut up in an asylum. Yeah, I heard them talk about it. Mabel, she's a good girl. Mabel stuck up for me. But I knew she wouldn't be able to stand up against Geoffrey. In the end, he'd have his way. He always did. But I settled him. I settled my kind, loving son. Hey! I crept down in the night. Oh, it was quite easy. Brewster was away. My dear son was asleep. He had a glass of water by the side of his bed. He always woke up in the middle of the night and drank it off. I poured it away. And I emptied the bottle of eye drops into the glass. He'd wake up and sweat it down before he knew what it was. There was only a teaspoonful of it, but that was enough, you see, quite enough. And he did. They came to me in the morning and broke it to me very gently. They were afraid it would upset me.
Well, that is the end of the story. Of course, the poor old man was put in an asylum. He wasn't really responsible for what he'd done, and the truth was known, and everybody was sorry for Mabel and could not do enough to make up for their unjust suspicions. But if it hadn't been for Geoffrey realizing what the stuff was he had swallowed, and trying to get everyone to get hold of the antidote without delay, it might never have been found out. I believe there are very definite symptoms of atropine, dilated pupils of the eyes and all that, but of course, as I have said, Dr. Rawlinson was very short-sighted, poor old man, and in the same medical book which I went on reading, and some of it was most interesting, it gave the symptoms of ptomaine poisoning and atropine, and they are not unlike. But I can assure you, I have never seen a pile of fresh haddock without thinking of the thumb mark of St. Peter."
There was a long pause. Then Mr. Petherick said, with a slow shake of his head, "My dear friend, my very dear friend, you really are quite amazing." "I shall recommend Scotland Yard to come to you for advice," said Sir Henry.
"Well, at all events, Aunt Jane, there is one thing you don't know."
"Oh, yes, I do, dear. It happened just before dinner, didn't it, when you took Joyce out to admire the sunset? It's a very favourite place, that, there by the jasmine hedge. That is where the milkman asked Annie if he could put up the banns."
"Dash it all, Aunt Jane, don't spoil all the romance. Joyce and I aren't like the milkman and Annie."
"That is where you make a mistake, dear. Everybody is very much alike, really. But, fortunately perhaps, they don't always realize it.